Greetings and courtesy and respect to all of you, the lovely audience of the Elixir of Awareness channel. Welcome to the 22nd episode. In this episode, we want to talk about habits and their effects on our lives, so please stay with us until the end. The main source of this episode of ours is a very good book called Atomic Habits by Mr. James Clear. We want to check the main ideas of this book together, so please stay with us. Success is the product of our daily habits, not a momentary change or metamorphosis. If we examine the roots of the words well, we can discover important points about the human unconscious. For example, the Latin root of the word identity is identidem, which means repeatedly. In fact, it seems that when humans created this language, they thought that our identity and personality is the result of doing things repeatedly. If we do something once, it isn't the rule but the exception. But if we constantly repeat that work, it will become a rule. Here is an important question. Why do you think our brain makes habits? And how does the habit of doing different things help to improve our lives? Actually, there are three main reasons why our brain forms habits. The first reason is that it can save energy. When we get used to doing something, we do it with less energy, so we consume less calories also. To understand this concept, you can refer to your first driving experience. At first time, we were full of stress and sweaty and our legs were shaking. But when we get used to it, we were driving with much less energy and stress. The second reason is to increase the speed of our reaction when faced with various issues. We react faster when we get used to something. And the third reason is also to increase our skills in dealing with various issues. The interesting thing is that all three things somehow help our survival, and in Continue we'll explain to you how these habits are formed. And based on the science that habit study gives us, we'll examine how we can build good habits and also eliminate our bad habits. One point that the author of the book points out is that progress in changing habits isn't linear. When we decide and start a project or work, our progress is like a plane taking off from the ground, not like a rocket taking off from the ground. That is to say, for that habits to be formed inside us, we must first provide a series of conditions and perform a series of prerequisite tasks. And like a plane's takeoff, we also need a little time to reach the desired speed, and that progress won't happen suddenly. In agricultural science, there are three main stages for a plant to bear fruit: planting, growing, and harvesting. The growing stage is the stage where the progress and results are imperceptible. It means that the seed is growing, but because it's under the soil, we don't see it. It's a very important point that Mr. James Clear, the author of the book, says that many people stop taking positive actions because they don't see the results. For example, you started dieting or studying or exercising, but because you still don't see the final results, you stop those positive actions. So we must know that the path of progress isn't like Hollywood movies, in which your life will change completely within a few days or weeks. Of course, this may happen to some people, but it often requires patience, time, and repetition. Like agriculture, we also have to do the irrigation and then wait to see the sprouts rising from the soil. Another brilliant point that the author of the book points out is that if we want to form a good habit in ourselves, we must consider that habit based on our identity, not the result. Let's give an example. For example, when you want to lose 18 kg, this is a habit change based on the result. You may ask yourself what I can do for this purpose. But Mr. James Clear believes that there's a better question about this. And that question is to ask yourself, what kind of person is a person who loses 18 kilograms? In fact, what's their identity and how do they behave? And to ask yourself what the details of their lifestyle and their outlook on life are like. James Clear believes that most people start their life changes based on results, while they should start based on identity. When you think too much about the results, for example, you imagine that you've reached the end point. Your brain concludes that you've actually reached the end point, and actually, our brain gets deceived. As a result, our brain spends less energy on that goal, and eventually, we won't have the necessary strength to continue the path. Persians have a famous proverb that expresses this point beautifully. The translation of this proverb is this: talking about it is half the pleasure. That is to say, The complete description and imagination of a pleasure prevent the real experience of its pleasure. This idea is kind of antithetical to the psychology of success, which constantly insists that we think positively and asks us to imagine our dreams in great detail and think that those goals have come true. But research proves that when we think too much that we've reached the end point, and when our goals are based on results, our brain mistakenly thinks that we've reached the end, and thus has not the necessary energy to continue. For example, in an emotional relationship, we may love someone, but when we make memories with that person in our mental fantasy world and imagine the best things with all details with them, according to researchers, the probability of expressing interest in that person in reality is less. So we'll say that famous proverb again: talking about it is half the pleasure. So don't think too much and excessively positively. Of course, positive thinking is very good, but remember that overdoing anything can have negative results. We must remember that doing is very more effective than imagination. Mr. James Clear believes that for a habit to form well within us, it must go through a 4-stage cycle many times so that it becomes a part of our regular habits. The first stage is sign. For example, when you like pizza and when you feel the smell of pizza, it's a sign that something you like is close to us. The second stage is passion. That is when we find the desire and appetite to eat pizza. The third step is the respond. It means when we eat pizza and respond to our inner desire. And eventually, the fourth stage is the reward. That is, after we finish the pizza, we feel an extremely pleasant experience. Now, the next time we feel the smell of pizza again, our inner desire will be more activated, our response will be more explicit, and the reward also will be more. And this 4-step cycle is repeated again and again until it becomes a habit. The question is, does this habit not make our passion less eager to do something? The answer is yes. Sometimes it's possible, and sometimes this addictive cycle makes us repeat destructive habits and get addicted to doing destructive habits. Because the reward of that work is enjoyable for us, so we increase its dose to get a better reward. Also, this can happen positively. That is to say, it can lead to an emphasis on positive habits. For example, a smoker used to smoke 1 cigarette a day, but after a while they get used to smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day. In fact, sometimes we make the response more intense to increase the reward. Mr. James Clear says that if we know this 4-stage cycle, we can build good habits and also stop our destructive habits. Let's talk a little about the first stage, the sign. The signs can be activated in you visually. Our visual sensors are the most powerful and the most numerous of our sensors. We've about 11 million receiver sensors, and 10 million of them are belonging to vision. So practically, the signs are very effective on us. In an experiment, cocaine addicts were shown a photo of cocaine for only 35 milliseconds in one frame of a movie that was played for them. They didn't see the image of cocaine with their conscious mind, but after finishing the film, all the effects and changes of a deep desire were observed in their brains. So we should be careful about the things around us and what we see. If we want to form a good habit in ourselves, we must place its signs around us. And if we want to get rid of a bad habit, we must first get rid of its signs around us. The addiction camps have an interesting slogan that says if you want to get rid of addiction, you must remove the ball, playground, and playmate. For example, if your attention is drawn to your mobile phone and social networks while reading, you can put your mobile phone away from your sight while reading. We can't have useful reading while holding the mobile phone. So, we want you to think about this. If you've a bad habit, what are the signs that make you want to do that bad habit? So remove them as much as possible. Be aware that the only way to cope at this stage is to eliminate or reduce signs. But as we said, the second stage is passion. Many tests have been done and neuroscientists have identified a main suspect in it. A molecule with very complex properties called dopamine. Dopamine is the root of many of our feelings, emotions, and desires. In fact, it's dopamine that ignites passion in us. It's dopamine that activates the pleasure circuits in our brains. Traces of dopamine can be found even in the complex subject of love. During an experiment, neuroscientists placed a series of electrodes in the brain of mice so that their brains couldn't secrete dopamine. And the strange thing they observed was that the mice could enjoy, but they didn't have the will to do things. It's interesting to know that even eating and the basic needs of mice, which were based on passion, had stopped. And the mice lived without desire and passion until they died. While their entire brain structure was correct, but only dopamine had been removed from it. So in the passion phase, we should know that dopamine is a very effective factor. Mr. Peter Mills also conducted another experiment about dopamine. But unlike the previous experiment, this time he injected a large dose of dopamine into the rats. In fact, he'd designed a valve using a mechanism that if the mice put their heads there, they'd receive stimuli that would lead to the release of dopamine in their brains. It's very strange that a mouse put its head there up to 800 times and repeated this thing again and again until it died. In fact, it was so much passion that the mice neglected to take care of their basic needs. These two experiments show how dopamine can create disaster in both directions. Isn't it interesting? Actually, we don't know the reason for many of our behaviors and habits. And if we know the origin of our behaviors, our power to control them will increase. All the author's effort is to tell you that our habits are formed in this four-stage cycle, and what things we can control and change in this cycle, and what effect controlling those things will have on our lives. We've little will to control our unconscious behaviors, and this little will increases when we recognize this cycle and make it self-aware so that we can use it to our advantage in life. There are some other interesting points about the passion stage. He says that doing a series of good deeds isn't that attractive. Some good deeds don't produce much passion in us. And a technique that can help is to relate those tasks to things we like. For example, if you love steak, you can use it as a factor that creates passion in yourself. For instance, if you're going to do something important this week, promise yourself that you'll definitely eat steak after doing it. In fact, maybe that work isn't very attractive to you, but it's good and useful work. But because its reward is an attractive reward for you, it can create enthusiasm in you. Another point is that we can increase our passion if we change our perception of different issues. For example, saving is a form of self-limitation. It means you give up buying a series of things so that you can save your money. But the point is that this look doesn't produce enthusiasm in us. But if we change our perspective, that is, we consider saving not as a self-limiting factor but as a type of financial freedom, then we can create passion in ourselves. For example, if we think that by saving, we won't do a series of hard works anymore, and we can go on a trip and have financial freedom and buy something we like. This kind of look creates more passion in us. The bad news is that many enjoyable things in this world aren't relatively good things. And many useful works, unfortunately, don't have those pleasures in the beginning. For example, running for 20 minutes may tire you, but repeating this work can be good for your health in the medium and long term and solve many of your diseases and probable problems. But at the moment, running for 20 minutes every day may not be so enjoyable. But maybe eating your favorite greasy and delicious fast food at that moment can make you happier. While the effects of daily consumption of fast food, in the long run, may not be good for your health. So let's try to expand our view a little. But as we said, the third step of the cycle is the response. If you want to make a good habit, try to make it as simple as possible. For example, if you want to register for the gym, but the location of that gym is too far from your home, or for example, if you want to study for 10 hours a day, because doing these activities is a bit difficult, eventually you'll stop at the third stage. So try to plan your work realistically and consider the limitations of your life. In fact, we should try to look for simpler and smaller responses. But don't forget that these simple and small answers can gradually grow like a snowball and produce great results. We need to know that regardless of our age and circumstances, we've the power to change our circumstances. It means that our brain changes itself according to our lifestyle and our needs and with changing conditions. The important thing is that this change is possible at any age. So please don't give up and don't think because if you're old you aren't able to change your situation anymore. Our brain is much smarter and more complex than you think. Our mind changes according to our different needs. Another interesting example, given by the book, is that when we do something, out of the billions of neurons in our brain, only a certain number start working with each other. For example, when we speak, only some of our billions of nerve cells are involved, not all of them. So when we do something for a long time, some neurons in our brain will automatically activate and help us to do that work. But as we said, the fourth stage of the habit cycle was the reward stage. It's important that if we want to do something good, we should make it as enjoyable as possible. And of course, if it's bad work, try to reduce its pleasure of it as much as possible. For example, if you're planning to quit smoking, promise yourself that every time you smoke, you'll see a few pictures of a smoker's damaged lungs on the internet and try to reduce the pleasure of smoking in this way. In fact, by doing this, you'll break the fourth stage of the cycle. In 1981, George Fisher presented an interesting idea about nuclear wars. George Fisher suggested that the key that is supposed to fire the atomic bomb should be placed in the heart of a volunteer. And if the person who's responsible for firing the atomic bomb wants to press the button, they must first order to kill the volunteer and remove the key from their heart's vestibule. In fact, he believed that with this disgusting and inhuman act, the consequences of a bigger crime can be prevented. You may ask yourself, what should I do if I want to become a professional in a task? The answer is simple. The only way to become professional is to do it more and more. But we must note that we can become professionals in what we've a talent for. But how can we recognize our talent? We've already answered this question once in the episode of The Sign of Genius on the Elixir of Awareness channel. The answer is just by doing. There's no way you can discover your talent in it just by imagining and sitting at home. You won't succeed in discovering your talent and inner voice until you do it and try. Only by doing one work, you can understand whether you're talented in that work or not. Another point is that even in the work we love and were made for, there are moments when that work seems repetitive to us. But as we said before in the Suffering of Boredom episode, the way to reach mastery in anything is to accept and tolerate boredom as an integral part of the growth process. Remember the example we gave at the beginning of this episode. Our progress isn't like a sudden rocket launch, but like an airplane taking off from the ground. It means that progress always requires time and energy. All right, now we've reached the end of this episode. And the final question of this episode is, what are the 3 works that you decide to start and turn into your permanent habit in your life? Please write your experiences in the comments section for us. We'll be so happy to read your comments. Thank you very much for being with us until the end of this episode.